All right. So today we hope to provide you with some guidance on structuring and building up your doctoral thesis more generally, and specifically for you, for the start, to be aware that students actually often struggle in building up their methodology and the methods within that, simply because they want to select a method right before they know, first, what is the research problem, second, about the existing studies of relevance to the problem, and third, the wider literature in the research field. Now, we will spend quite a time through that webinar on exactly those 3 points, because that's a repeating struggle and shouldn't be underestimated. Then we hope you will realize that the research method should be derived from existing studies and based on clearly articulated and objectively comprehensible and reproducible reasons. And for you to understand the placement of research methods and methodologies through your thesis, then to get an overview on how to apply research methods with looking at 1-2 examples. And fifth, to learn about the role of reverse engineering within the research methods and methodology crafting process. And then exactly we go off the record and you have the chance to ask off record about any type of questions. And perhaps we could use that time to reflect on what have been your challenges on that link on your methods and methodology. Okay. So with this, let's start. Why students often struggle to select a method? Now, wait a moment in here. Where do methods actually come from? Who is the selector of the research methods and who's putting together the methodology? Is it the researcher's creativity that's selecting the method, means you? Or is it the supervisor, because he's a very skilled person with a lot of experience, and he certainly will have a preference of using A over B because he will or she will know what works out and what not for the type of research you will be undertaking. Now, that might also be an influential role. Or is it perhaps the faculty and the program where you're enrolling at, because it's designed in a form that has certain requirements that will determine what method should or could be applied. Now, this would be the obvious part within the faculty. As we will talk about, there's the not so obvious part, which is called politics. So there might be people in the faculty that are advocating for some things to be done, even though it's not written down, and that also should be understood. Now, so then, where do the methods come from? And how is the overall methodology coming together? Let's look at it. Going back. Now, the first point, students often struggle because they want to select the method before they know what's the research problem. Now, did you actually know that the research method will lend itself to you? It will come naturally as part of the research. So it's nothing that you actually would need to hunt for. It does come as your research problem becomes clear, and we will see why, because at that point in time, you will understand more what is the research about, and gradually things will become clear. However, unfortunately, what's to be observed is that there's often a bias towards a perceived urgency in selecting a method, and worse off, some questions that you want to ask and you want to engage with people and to collect data. There's a lot of excitement. So there's a bias towards action that then in a second stage leads to exhaustion, rather than starting off slowly and working out what is the research actually about, what is the issue, what is the objective, and how is the objective relating to the issue and the research problem. So this is the first thing where the struggle comes in. Or in other words, students are quick and very motivated and eager in selecting methods and coming up with questions. And by the same time, they find it very hard to dedicate time to work out what the actual research problem is. So this is a basic understanding that you might want to think about. Now, then the second struggle reason comes in, because you are asked to select a method actually before you know about the existing studies of relevance to the problem. Now, obviously you can read a lot of literature, but that lots of literature wouldn't guide you unless you have a clear understanding about the problem, and therefore what is of relevance to the problem. Now, therefore, a suitable starting point for identifying research method is to identify existing studies of relevance to the problem. And while quite obvious, perhaps let's recall, research builds on the state of the art, and the state of the art, by and large, will come with a good amount of methods and methodologies that have been tested and proven, and it's clear how they work out and in which context and situations they can be applied. Now, questions that you at this point in time, once you look for relevant studies, should be able to answer are, what are the studies of relevance to build on? What methods and methodologies have these applied? What are their foundations and groundings? So which type of frameworks could you extract from there? How have these methods and methodologies worked out? What worked well? What are the shortcomings? Usually that's mentioned in those studies, and you should build on that. And what have they found out about the problem, and what remained unknown? So it's not that you should start with, are you that method? And I will ask that question. No. In a month or 2 or 3 from now, once you have a clear understanding what others already asked and what they have found out, you should have a much better understanding of what you actually will need to ask and what is already very well known. And as we are there, what's very well known is part of the literature review. It's not okay understood and out of the thesis, but it very likely has its reason and should be taken into the literature review. Now, existing studies thus will guide you in your research and tell you what methods might be applied. They will tell you what questions have been answered and what might still be asked. They will tell you what worked well and what not, and how long things might take, which also is an important aspect, the element of time. And at this point in time, less own creativity is more. Don't envision things, instead take informed decisions based on how others have been doing things. So let's move further from there. And students often struggle because they want to select a method before they know the wider literature in the research field. And this is very much about boundaries, as much as it is as looking beyond boundaries. How have research projects in related fields been done? What is out of this research, and therefore you don't need to take it into consideration. Now, all of that, as you progress, you will understand, and the boundaries and how to blend things in will gradually become clear. Now, at that point in time, you should be able to understand what are the wider studies of relevance that you have come across, what methods and methodologies have these applied, how are these different to the existing studies of relevance, what are the commonalities, what might be leveraged from that into your research. And all of that then perhaps is not part of the literature review in your thesis, but part of the methodology chapter, detailing, explaining why you rule out some things while other things would be preferred. Now, this is something that gradually will come together. And only at that point in time, the creativity then comes in, like once you understand clearly what to ask yourself. Now, in other words, setting on boundaries in between 2 and 3 will facilitate to build up your methodology. And just to have it mentioned, such boundaries will change over time. What is within the boundaries of this research? What is outside? How do I establish the boundaries? All of that is a very slow process, and it's not settling on one side rules out others, but it's a front and back. So it's an emergent thing, and the same applies for your methodology. It's not a one-off thing, as we will see in some slides. And only by the end of your research, once you will be firm and good, you will have a valid methodology written up. And as a hint of advice, at any point in the research, you should attempt to have a notion about your current 1, 2, and 3. So have it well written up. What is the research problem understood today? How does it emerge? What are there for the existing studies of relevance? And what is perhaps out of scope or out of boundary, at least. So in closing, why do students often struggle to select a moment? Now, quite literally speaking, wait a moment is a good advice. Don't rush into your research, but make sure you have a clear understanding about what is the research problem, what are the related studies. And once you are getting there, you will also gradually starting to understand what is a wider field and therefore not directly in. So with this, you will be able to tell where the methods come from, what are the related studies that you take things from, and how do you fit it in within your own methodology, and what are the frameworks that either you build together based upon all of those methods, or perhaps better, that can be adopted from earlier studies. And the more tested thing, who is the selector? Now, there's a lot of politics in that, as much as there is creativity that should be avoided. Creativity in you is something that perhaps you should take out as much as possible and rather work over the research problem or the related studies. The other types of politics that refer to the supervisor and the faculty are more nebulous and need to be negotiated. This will be an ongoing process, and it's important for you to understand what your supervisor is up for and how to agree on a common level, and that more often than not can be easily achieved. And what are the politics in the faculty? And now this perhaps is the most challenging thing for a newcomer once being in, to understand the power dynamics and how to play them. Now, are there any questions until this point before we go into the next part of the webinar?
There's none in the chat area.
Okay. So then, deriving and justifying research methods. So how do you justify your research methods, your theoretical foundations, and the overall methodology? Well, we already started with the most important thing. Derive them from the existing studies of relevance to the problem, the wider literature in the field, and the wider context. And then, take this as a basis, so to clearly articulate the reasons why one particular procedure or technique was chosen, but not another. I think it's always good to have that spelled out. And once you have that spelled out, as long as you have complied to that, you will be on the relatively safe side. And even where at a later point in time, once it comes to your viva and examination, the examiners might disagree with your choice. Research is as much about logical arguments as it is about questioning and disagreement. So if you have it well worked out, there might be disagreement, but you might just be lucky, or you might just in the position to well make your case, and then the examiner will disagree but say, okay, based upon your justification and the existing studies you have been building on, this is still credible research, and perhaps only some slight amendments might be needed. Now let's illustrate that, how that deriving things from earlier studies and framing your research in that way can look out in practice. This is taken from a recent thesis of one of our students. Now, as you see, this is a rather standard structure of a literature review chapter, starting with an introduction. And then in 2.3, you will see something coming in that talks about the nature and practice of sales engineering, abbreviated SE, the professional identities of sales engineering, and the dual identities or worlds within software sales engineering. And in 2.5, you talk about identity and foundational theories of identity. So there comes a bit of theory in. In 2.3, you have the practical elements, and in 2.5, you handle the theoretical dimension of that. Now, how is that taken further then in the methodology chapter? As a matter of fact, the 2.5 is taken into 3.0 into the introduction part, so to frame the methodology chapter on a theoretical basis, while 2.3 is taken into 3.3. And there you can also see the power of mirroring, that you mirror the 2.3 into a 3.3. So there's a recognition factor from anyone reading. So you quickly get there will be a relation in between 2.3 and 3.3. Now, is that coincidence or is that just well designed? Think about that. And then if you look into the thesis, and the thesis is available below the URL points to it. If you look into the thesis, then you see that in 3.0 introduction, indeed, the discussion of 2.5 is being continued, so to justify what has been done on a theoretical base. And likewise, once you look into 3.3, you will see that in 3.3, the discussion that has been started and kicked off in 2.3 is continued. So there's a red line and narrative and a clear mirroring across the sections and chapters that justifies how you have been building up your methodology and which are the methods that you have been applying. So it's not coming out of the blue. It's not you as a researcher arguing for, I thought that is a good thing of doing. No, it's well derived from the literature-based discussion earlier and how the problem has been framed around sales engineering, and then how that has been linked into the theory. And doing so will allow you ultimately to map out and build up your entire methodology chapter. So the tiny 3.3 at the end of the day will tell you how deep you need to go backwards into 3.1 and 3.2 and what needs to be covered in there. Likewise, it will inform you how 3.4 and 3.5, 3.6 need to be shaped and written up. Now, this is on the one hand structured work, on the other hand, it's a good use of mirroring, and it's a very good example for you to look into on how to build up and keep your narrative.
So Andreas, we do have a comment in the comments field. The question is, I may have a question or more a terminological issue. To me, it's not clear what the difference is between method and methodology. I'm thinking of methodology as a sum of methods, but I'm not sure.
But you can be sure. That's exactly like that. So the methods, the sum of methods will be part of your methodology. But in your methodology chapter, you will write more than just about your methods. I mean, if we go back, then you will see that perhaps strictly speaking, 3.3 is focusing purely on methods. 3.5 is also focusing on action research as a method, but you will also see a theoretical foundation and justification in 3.1 and 3.2, which is part of the methodology chapter, but not focused only on a method as such. Likewise, the end part of the methodology chapter is detailing how the research has been conducted, who was engaged, what has been done, and what were the ethical considerations of all of that. So the methodologies are part, no, the methods are part of the methodology chapter, but the methodology chapter describes by and large what was done in your research, if that makes sense. Now, as for the theoretical framework, well, the theoretical...
Sorry, I had another comment is, for me, I'm a little confused between the theoretical framework and the methodology as well.
Okay, so the theoretical or conceptual framework will, on the one hand, ideally be identified within the literature review based upon the existing studies. In some circumstances, which can really happen, you make up your own particular framework, your conceptual framework, based on a number of other frameworks in combination with other methods. You do that typically if your research only gradually comes together. So it's not initially planned how you have done the things. In this case, you need in hindsight to build it up. And we have an entire section 5 of this webinar dedicated to re-engineering, where we will be looking into that. So the theoretical or conceptual framework is part of the methodology. And usually it comes at the beginning, spelling out and guiding how things belong together and providing the glue. So keeping the entire methodology chapter together, if that makes sense. And as we talk about justifications here, it's very important to come back to verbalizing is important, working out things clearly is important, because that will allow you and others to disagree on choices, but still they might be acceptable as long as they can be objectively explained and, as importantly, or perhaps more importantly, challenged. Because research is about challenging the accepted and being critical and in a constructive manner. And this applies equally to the methods and methodology chapter and parts, because ultimately research is a learning journey and your understanding on views will change over time as the concept and understanding in research will change over time. But now think about it, if you work over existing studies, quite literally speaking, you can place a ball further. It's not you who will be challenged. Why have you as a researcher been doing things? I mean, you still will need to explain it, but you can explain it based upon the existing studies that your research is building on. And okay, Susanna was putting forward a question.
Actually, we've got a couple. So we had, we spoke about the framework. There was a response back going, Doc, simply this, can you make an example of method and methodology? Just want to see the difference between the two. So if we start with that one.
Yeah, right. Now, if you look into this example, see this, in 3.3, you will find some methods applied in that study, as much as in 3.5, there you will see action research, which also is a method that has been applied. So these methods are part of the methodology chapter, but you see that 3.4 is not looking at methods as such, but talks about the research design. And now this will be arbitrary why 3.5 is coming after 3.4. It very well could be also a subchapter of 3.3, where you just focus on presenting the method. But for design reasons, you might have it in 3.4, because it well could be that 3.4 just applies to the methods presented in 3.3, while 3.5 then has a different execution and therefore is explained in 3.6 and 3.7. Now, this is a very individual thing on how you bring together your thesis. I mean, here in figure 3.3 on the right side, you see a standard way on how to build up your methodology chapter, working from the right side of the philosophy to the middle of the circle, where it's about data collection and data analysis. Now, this is by the book. Now, research is often not done by the book. If you have a number of studies within your research, then you might apply a number of methods, and each of those methods might need some literature framing. It might need another, like here 3.4, research design and execution for the study. So therefore you need to repeat it. Now, this is often where students get lost, and which only in hindsight at the end of the research often becomes clear. In particular, if your research is emergent, you plan to do one study, but once doing that study, you come about other literature suggesting doing that method, and the data you collected is not satisfactory. Therefore, you consider applying that method too. So you do a study 2, and then a study 3, which all are building on the things that you achieved at the earlier studies. So all is building up in a methodological way, and afterwards need to be integrated and presented in a consistent form. And we will look into that.
Okay. There was a Another one about, is the theoretical framework different from the philosophical underpinning and concept of a methodology?
Oh, well, we can spend here years. And I think it depends with whom, it depends with whom you talk. If you talk with a very pragmatic person like me, I would say let's focus on the framework, and how we call it afterwards we will see. And it's not Andreas telling that, it's the existing studies of relevance that will point you, and more importantly, that will put you in a position so to defend why you call things as you call them. Now, if you don't like that answer, then you will need to start in this figure 3.3 research on the philosophy side, and go very, very deep, so to build up a very, very profound understanding and build up your study from there, which can be done too. Obviously, you won't be able to play on both ends. You only have a given amount of time to finish your research project. So you need to understand, do you want to spend more time on the theoretical foundation, or do you want to spend more time on the existing study of relevance, and from there engineer backwards? So next question.
Okay. Oh, sorry, I was just jumping for a second. Then the other one, interrelated, so I have one is, so the theoretical framework is derived from the literature review, is that correct?
So sorry, where's that?
Is the theoretical framework derived from the literature review?
Yes, ideally it's derived in there, or at least the initial one. Because as said, research is emergent, it's changing over time. Now I'm just working with a student together for 6 years. And as it turned out, what seemed to be in year 5 part of the findings, once put into chapter 2, provided a perfect starting base and argumentation line as a conceptual framework on why the research was done as it was done. So you see, in hindsight, and that's the role of reverse engineering that we will look into in detail, in hindsight, the research looked much differently, but also much more clarity and logic was in there. So yes, for you, once you would read that thesis once it's published, it looks like it was in chapter 2 from day 1. But at the end of the day, it was not. It came in at year 5. Now that's a long time. It's not that the work was not structured before, but the methods were built up in a very different way. Only once the framework was put on top, then it made sense to structure this study in a very unique way. So.
Makes sense. I have another one is, my difficulty is that there is no previous research in the specific field. How can I design a methodology based on previous studies?
Okay, now we have that handled in one of the earlier webinars. Unfortunately, I don't know what was the title, but my colleague— I think
it was the problematization one, wasn't it?
That can be. My colleague, I think her name is Ingrid Mayborn from Australia, where Jack is based. She put it brilliantly at her blog. She said there's no such thing. It's you as the research novice who was always caught in 2 traps. Either you have your boundaries too narrow or too broad. Both will lead to the fact that you don't find what you need. Either you say there is no data, nothing has been done, which rarely is the case in a world where we have so many humans and so much publications. And the other is you try to get exactly into so many humans and so much publications, and you get lost. Settle on your issue, understand your problem, and within minutes, literally speaking, you can build up your research methodology outline, or your framework, or at least the first version of that. The point in here is that research is only difficult the first time you do it, which is likely the point where you are in now. If you do that 20, 30, 40, 50 times, it's rather like any other job. You know what to do and where to pick from.
It becomes second nature. I have another one is, I am pursuing a DBA and the university has hinted that the research is to be undertaken using action research. In this case, do I still have to justify the use of action research in the thesis?
Yeah, no, this is a tricky thing, right? And I know that because I've worked in a program using action research for many years. Now the point here is this is research, and in research you work over the state of the art. The state of the art comes with methods, and this is a short answer to it. But that's not a satisfactory answer to you, because exactly you study in a DBA where you're expected to use action research. Now, either that means you rule out all of the literature that is not using action research, or you use that literature not using action research and then just say, yeah, and now because my faculty mandates me to use action research, I apply that method, and that will not fly well in the Viva. Or, as you see here in this chapter 3 methodology, you nicely bring together 3-5 action research with other methods. Now, and there, recall that initially one of the slides talked about power dynamics in the faculty. This is a really tricky thing because there will be different understandings in the faculty, and some might advocate for you to just do it the master level way and use the action research method. And don't ask me where the article "the" comes from, because this is research. There's no such thing as "the." So you need to play it in the smartest way possible. And if you look into this thesis, you will get a good idea on how to do it in a very professional way. I would argue. If this is an answer that's factually, I don't know.
Okay, and then we have another one is, so using the research Onion illustrated, if I chose qualitative, then decided I wanted to incorporate many qualitative methods, as such as ethnography, interview, and observations. I'm therefore using a generic qualitative research, and I'm doing this in a pragmatic way. Well, sorry, am I doing this in a pragmatic way? So it's the searching process.
Yes, my main observation in this, rather before answering directly to the question, is a notion of I. And we had that at the beginning, who is choosing here? And if I read I, then it's a researcher choosing. And I do understand that many do that. But I've been working with those many also together over many years. And I can tell you, once research is going wrong, it's because I has been very dominant. If you want your research to go smoothly, take out I, not only out of this.
So it's in third person rather than first person, you mean?
And well, it's not only how you write it up, and I understand that opens a full new Pandora's box on how to do things. You can write in the first person if that's what you wish to. What I mean is work over related studies and understand what the research problem is. Then actually the question of I is not on the table. I mean, if you would want to try building up your methodology chapter by following plain forward of the book figure 3.3, good luck. And many students do that. And occasionally, or perhaps most of the times, that even goes through. But you never will get such a brilliant chapter like the one you see on the left side that you can read right through the table of content, right? You don't see there 3.1 positivism, 3.2 deduction, 3.3 monomethod quantity. You don't see that. Instead, you see specific titles. That specific titles don't come out of blue. They come over existing studies and over understanding very well what are the research issues that are looked into. If you have that clarity, you can have very specific titles. You don't need to work in a generic way or over generic titles as in figure 3.3, right? So very different working approaches, very potentially different outcomes. Okay.
And we've got one last question before we move on. If your research topic is new and you can't find literature about it, can you continue with that study?
And again, we come back to the earlier question. If you can't find literature, if things haven't done, that's not existing. It definitely is not existing. And I'm telling that after having spent 20 years of research in innovation. What would be new there? Let's take an example. You go to Mars, you take a robot there. You do some stuff there, experiments. It's new, right? But guess, you have done all of those things on Earth too. What in this context is really new? You take the internet. You take the Internet of Things. You take sensors. Now, every new that comes in builds on existing, right? It's not that the internet has been invented day overnight. Now, currently, the most popular research connection, COVID, great. Welcome to hype. Get busted. No, there's nothing new in pandemics, right? You just need to look actually what happened in 1918. So again, you can make a lot of buzz, and researchers like to make buzz because that means they get new research funded, right? That's what they do for a living. But you as a research student understand there is no such thing as new, or rarely it is. And that tiny element of new will have lots of old and well established in research. But we can look into that more in detail. You are very much invited. Wednesdays is my free open weekly session. Come in, bring your case along, and we discuss it. And I love to be challenged on that, and I love to learn. Perhaps the next time I give that webinar, I give it very differently.
Yeah, we can challenge Austin, yourself, and Stephen. And we have one last comment is, if you use a thematic narrative analysis, is it correct to use I, or you suggest the researcher?
No, again, it's not me suggesting things in here. I do have a blog post written some years ago. It's like, how did your parents teach you riding a bike? Did they do that on the ground or on a high wire? My parents taught me on the ground, because the reason is I fell a lot of times, and falling from a high wire hurts much more than falling from 60 centimeters down. Now, the point here is I can talk to you for 4 to 10 hours without any problems, talking about myself and how I did my research. But at the end of the day, what I will be doing most of the time is I talk about my view, about my opinions, about processes, about how things have been done. And that can be done orally and written very, very quickly in lengths. Now, on the other hand, if I focus on a problem, why is that roof broken? Well, I need to pause there. I need to think. I need to understand, why is it broken? What happened? Is the building material collapsed? Has it collapsed? Was a meteorite coming in? A plane crashed into the house? What happened in here? Now, you see, I can't talk in the hundreds of words on that, because I need to be analytical. Now, as a novice researcher, one of the main learning outcomes of taking the doctorate is to be analytical, critical thinking, doing the analytics. Now, if you adopt the I, once you still learn how to do that, it's not obvious to you. If you want it to be obvious to you, you adopt the third person. You make the research problem the focus. But having said that, I do understand that you certainly will have a role in your research and impact it. In any type, even in the exact sciences, once you work in a laboratory environment, you will contaminate it, right? And even there, it will be written up and acknowledged, contamination possibility, because of the gloves I was wearing. But you rarely see a researcher writing in the I, then I dressed the gloves, then I looked at my gloves, I turned my hand, I made sure there is no hole in. No, rarely you find that. Okay, let's go to the next.
Okay. This is not a question, just a response. There is no I in the instruction from the supervisors. I would love to do a pure ethnographic study, but there is no I. It is about finding something novel. The method chosen by the team aren't novel. I'm still confused. I need divine intervention. It's more a comment rather than a question. And the last one is, how do I express data analysis of qualitative study in my research proposal? Did you want to hold that one to the end?
Yeah, we might look into that at the end, because it's not a question that can be answered straightforward.
Yeah. Okay, if you'd like to head on.
Yeah, we have been in here. So let's go to placement of research methods and methodology, which is rather a straightforward thing. Now, obviously, research methods and methodologies are an integral part of your thesis. It's not something that's limited to the methodology chapter, usually chapter 3, but it's a key part, as we have seen also of the literature review chapter. Remember the earlier example, where in 2.3 and 2.5, the methods and methodology was already introduced. And then in the methodology chapter, it was followed on. But it's also part of the scene setting, an overview of your work, which is chapter 1, the introduction. And here it's a bit unfair to the student that you're expected to produce chapter 1 draft and hand it in. Yes, you of course can be doing that, but at that point in time, you're clueless about what actually is the literature of relevance. You remember the 1, 2, 3 initially that we spent a lot of time at. So all of that at that point in time, you still won't have on information. You can come up with a draft, but understand it only will be so good. Now, having said that, it will provide you the structure for presenting your data in chapter 4, because existing studies will have come with some structuring, so you can be guided by that. And it will provide you, and this perhaps comes to Buki, how I express data analytics in my research proposal. Now, once you come into chapter 5, you can look at the existing studies and they will provide you with guidance that can be used as a tool for you on how to analyze the data, how to present it, what to look into, and ultimately how to present the outcomes of your work in chapter 6. Now, if we go back to the action research example and the question there, now if you think about action research comes often in the reporting like first person, second person, third person, learning and development. Now, if already in the methodology chapter, you have a 3.3 or 3.5, in our example, it was 3.5 that we've been looking at, and there you introduce action research, then 3.1, 3.1.1 first person, then 1.2 second person, 1.3 third person, and then you mirror it and have the same structure in the chapter 6. So there's a recognition factor. And if you don't know what I always mean once I refer to mirroring, we run a webinar on that next week, and we also have replays from past webinars on that matter available. Now, method versus methodology. I think we discussed that, but here comes a more proper text. Let's have a look into that. A source of some confusion is that the words method and methodology are often treated synonymously, even though they do not mean the same thing in academia. In scholarly work, methods are practical hands-on steps for doing research. This usually includes defining the scope of the research project, coming up with a research question or hypothesis. I don't like here the word coming up because you derive it. You don't come up with it yourself. Selecting and collecting data, processing that data with certain tools to enable analysis, and then going through the data systematically to answer the central questions. So what is a methodology? In essence, methodology is a discussion of methods. This includes the theoretical ideas and concerns that inform the use of different methods. And what I don't like in here is the word ideas, because ideas again suggest you being creative, and please do not work over related studies, and there the theoretical ideas and concerns will be formulated what has been done. Now, a methodology section in a research paper needs to achieve 3 things, though not necessarily in this order. Firstly, it should consider what the nature of academic work is more generally, and what this might mean for anyone who explores the topic at hand. Recall related studies. Secondly, it needs to provide a literature review discussing what methods researchers have traditionally used to study the kind of topic that the project focuses on. Again, it's not your own creativity in here, it's related studies. Thirdly, it should explain what methods this particular project uses and why. Recall the example we've been seeing earlier, literature review chapter, point 2.3 and 2.5, and how that has been translated into the methodology chapter, 3.0 introduction and 3.3 respectively. Take a look at that. So, for your own thesis, this tip of advice might be translated into chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3, in that order, once you go from your initial research proposal, where you, by the way, write it up in the same way in structure, as we will see in some minutes. So a methodology needs to achieve three things we have seen. So please understand your research method and methodologies are an integral part of your thesis. It's not limited to the methodology chapter. It's a key part of the literature review, part of the scene setting overview, provides the structure, provides you with the tool for analytics, and can help you in defining and settling on your conclusion chapter. Now, how to apply research methods? That's a rather quick part. Channel creativity, build on how others have done, prove what did not work, do not invent new things. We've done that. Existing studies come with existing theoretical and conceptual frameworks as much as possible, build on them for your initial research proposal. Research is changing and emergent, so it might be that at the end of the research, you will blend in other frameworks. That's perfectly fine. Start simple. And so, therefore, understand the way you write up the research might be very different to the way you carried it out. And we will look into this. Now, this is an example. You build over existing studies. Now, this is a study that you can take. And if you take that study because you carry out research in that area, then this study will provide you with some framework. It will show you how to use mixed methods, what for, and which type of questions could be asked. And this then can allow you to justify and argue, like it's done in this example, why you have been doing what you did. Yeah. So building over existing studies is a catalyst for your research to go well and to be executed in a shorter time frame. Now, we come finally to the role of reverse engineering. If you haven't heard about that, let's look into that. Because reverse engineering is your friend. Because many things you ideally should have known or considered at the beginning will be only known or clear at the end. Thus, you need to reverse engineer to make things fit. And that is not about cheating or constructing things that are not faithfully done. No, it's about explaining things based upon existing literature, based upon existing frameworks. Obviously, at the end of your research, you have a much better knowledge. So, but is that an open invitation to wait until the end? No, clearly not. Start out with a simple, fitting, good, well-designed, well-engineered research project. Carry out the research, document it well, consistently go back to the literature, see if what you're doing has been done elsewhere, if your data collected fit to other data collected, if your analysis and the results fit to other studies, and what do those other studies tell you, what you could have been done differently or what you might have been done differently, or what you should have done for the next data collection round differently. So there will be many different forms for reverse engineering, reverse in terms of point in time, reverse in terms of tracing methods back, and reverse in terms of adapting your research questions in accordance to the findings. And we have a dedicated webinar on the research questions and how they do change over time. Take a look into that. Now, as perhaps has become clear so far, but just to be pretty clear, research is non-linear. You write it up linear, you plan it linear. As it is executed, as it is not linear. So identifying, justifying, and applying a research method can be straightforward undertaking. So while perhaps straightforward, it's also a gradual development. As said, start out with a simple proposal as shown at the left, and then make sure you have a clear understanding how the things translate into the right side of the thesis. Yeah, so as better as you keep track on that, as better you will be able to navigate through your thesis and through your research. Initially, you will be guided by the key literature, but then as soon as data and findings become available, And often you have data and findings already in your head because you observed the situation before you collected data. Wherever you interact, you collect the data. Yeah. So write them up, your observations, to become explicit, and then try to work over there, because that can guide you in your writing. And we also have a webinar available on that matter. And then it will allow you to clearly work out how the different parts of the thesis add up, recall the literature review 2.3 and 2.5, and how that connected very well to the methodology 3.0 and 3.3 in the first examples that we have been looking at. So this can be built up for your thesis equivalently and allows you to have a clear understanding how things belong together. So while working out the methods might be a sequential process, it's not a linear one. It's often more juggling through the literature, data, and methods, front and back. And so the knowledge and understanding builds up gradually. And afterwards, integrate and align. And this is what we will be focusing on next week in the webinar, on mirroring, on how this can be done, so that you can present your method consistently through the thesis, but also that you have a clear understanding how the different parts add up and what might be missing. And this ultimately, at the end of the day, once you hand in your thesis, will put you in a position to illustrate what you have been doing, like here in the figure 1.3. And that will obviously allow you to verbalize your research much better once it comes to the examination. So if you want to train that a bit further and more substantially, then if you're at the initial stage, take a look at our course on issue identification, problematizing, and research question framing. Or if you're at a very early stage, which might also be, we have a thesis proposal framing course also. And if you're at a later stage, more it's a writing up of your thesis and want to see and understand how to connect the different chapters, then take a look at the writing up and structuring your thesis course. And you can learn more about it. By the way, in our courses, all literature is available free of charge because we only use sources that are freely available from the internet. So also all follow-up links, therefore, usually will point you to further free resources, which you are invited to explore. Now, if there is still some time, now time is left, if there's still some energy left, let's now get off the record and come into some group activity and reflection on what we've been looking at. Let me stop the recording.